My title here is, was Adam the first man, or were Adam and Eve created in Genesis chapter 1? And as Tim was saying, I don't know why, but I guess God wants you to hear this twice today. In this lecture, I want to talk about Adam and Eve and what I think are difficult passages to reconcile within the first few chapters of Genesis. As I don't believe the Bible contradicts itself, sometimes we have to change our understanding, and sometimes that change can be radical. Just recall when you changed your understanding of immortal souls burning in hell forever. So, I'm going to be suggesting some pretty radical ideas, but apparently it's not the first time they've been suggested in this building. And I'm going to be saying, now, I'm not saying that what I'm saying is going to be explaining everything, or that I have everything correct, but I think this is worthy of consideration. As always, I am open to all criticism. So, the two creation proposals stated. Most Christians believe Adam and Eve were created on the sixth day. They believe there is a very brief description of the story in Genesis chapter 1, and then more details are given in chapter 2. But consider this. Genesis 1 gives us the days of creation, but not the personal names Adam and Eve. Genesis 2 and 3 gives us their names, but not the day of their creation. Therefore, without a concrete link, all we know is that at least one man and one woman were created on day 6, but we don't know if that couple was Adam and Eve. So, this is the proposal that I'm suggesting. 1, maybe thousands of men and women were created on day 6, or maybe it was just 6 pair or something like that, I don't know, like Tim was suggesting. And 2, none of them were Adam and Eve. They were created later. So let me begin. First of all, many of us believe there is a huge time gap between the first 2 verses of Genesis chapter 1. Although it is not plainly stated, it is needed to make room for other events we learn about later, like the creation of angels and their fall. That took some time and has to be put somewhere, so perhaps that's where it is. So, in a similar fashion, I am suggesting that we should not be surprised to find another gap here between chapters 1 and chapter 2. This gap and other existing people helps explain certain other verses. Now note, originally I had about 20 pages of stuff, but I had to cut that way down. And I still want to cover as many points as I can. This means detail will suffer, but maybe that's a good thing. Especially when I get to points of Hebrew grammar. Point number 1. Who was going to kill Cain? After Cain kills his brother Abel, Cain tells God at Genesis 4:14, "And I shall be a fugitive and a vagabond in earth, and it shall be that anyone who finds me shall kill me." So, without these other people in the world that I am proposing, Cain can only be referring to one of his brothers. But the Bible at this point has only told us about one other brother, and that is Abel, and he is now dead. Cain refers to the person as an anyone, and so these anyones must also be people wandering the earth. But how can Cain be considered a fugitive and a vagabond by his own family? I think it is more appropriate that Cain would be seen as a fugitive and a vagabond by unrelated outsiders who do not know him. But even if these people are his brothers, how many brothers do you think Cain had at this point who were out to murder him? Number 2, who was the next born after Abel? In chapter 4, it is clear that Cain was the firstborn, Abel the second, and Seth the third son. For at the end of the chapter it says, Genesis 4:25, "And Adam knew his wife again, and she bore a son, and called his name Seth. For she said, God has appointed me another seed instead of Abel, because Cain killed him." So, fair enough. Seth replaces Abel. But how many years later was this? This may be a surprise, but Adam was 130 years old. Genesis 5:3. And Adam lived 130 years and fathered ... Seth. Cain and Abel seem to have been born soon after the fall, and maybe Eve was even pregnant with them before they sinned. But everything changed after the fall. Eve blamed the serpent, and Adam blamed both God and Eve, and they were thrown out of paradise. Their world and their marriage was on the rocks. Considering how tragic this was, maybe we can understand why they didn't have another son for 130 years. Verse 25 says, and Adam knew his wife again, and she bore Seth. The verse doesn't plainly state that this is the first time in 130 years that Adam knew Eve. But however strange, I think that is a possibility. If they had been having sex on a regular basis, why did it take so long for Eve to have another son? I think it is possible that their relationship had been so badly damaged that it took that long to repair it. Number 3, Seth in the image of Adam. Let's read this verse again, but this time all the way to the end. Genesis 5:3. And Adam lived 130 years and fathered a son in his own likeness, after his own image, and he called his name Seth. Why is this verse pointing out something that should be obvious? If Adam is the only man in the world, who else's image would he be in? But this fact is emphasized twice in one verse with the words own likeness and own image. This information would only be necessary if Eve had other children who were not in Adam's image. But how so? If Adam and Eve had not had sex for 130 years, what would they have done in the meantime? Well, if there were lots of other men and women on the earth, perhaps they took comfort with them, and maybe even had children outside of their relationship. That's pretty speculative, but perhaps that is what this verse is hinting at. What else would it mean? Number 4, do the trees in the garden represent these people? The tree of the knowledge of good and evil may well be a metaphor for a certain group of these other humans. We know that trees are a metaphor for different peoples. Allow me to take little snippets out of Ezekiel chapter 31 to plainly establish that thought, and take special note of these references to people spoken of as trees in God's garden, or in Eden. Forgive my use of the easy-to-read version, but it is easy to read. Ezekiel 31:3. Assyria was a cedar tree. Streams flowed from that tree to all the other trees of the field. So that tree was taller than all the other trees of the field. Even the cedar trees in God's garden were not as big as this tree. Cypress trees did not have as many branches. Chestnut trees did not have such branches. And all the trees in Eden, God's garden, were jealous. All the trees of the field became sick with sadness for that big tree. I made the tree fall down to the place of death to join the other people who had gone down. In the past, all the trees of Eden, the best of Lebanon, drank from that water. The trees were comforted in the world below. Yes, those trees went down with the big tree to the place of death. That big tree made the other trees strong. Those trees had lived under the big tree's shadow among the nations. Egypt. There were many big and powerful trees in Eden. Which of those trees should I compare you to? They all went down to the world below. End quote. There certainly seems to be an awful lot of symbolism going on here relating to all kinds of different people living in God's Garden of Eden. It's difficult to ignore and explain away otherwise. 5. Eating the fruit of the trees. So, if people are symbolized by trees, what does it mean when Eve and then Adam ate the fruit of these people? We tend to focus on the aspect of acquiring the knowledge of good and evil, and I believe that is important, but let's focus on the eating, as eating can be symbolic of having immoral sex. Proverbs 30:20. Such is the way of an adulterous woman. She eats and wipes her mouth and says, I have done no evil. 6. Fruit is associated with sex. The very first command God gives humans is at Genesis 1:28. And God blessed them, and he said to them, be fruitful and multiply. Secondly, Wikipedia summarizes the Song of Solomon, telling us that in it, quote, the body is closely associated with fruit, as both become edible things. The lovers want to partake of one another. What the pomegranates in the Song of Solomon demonstrate is that love is synonymous with tasty consumption. End quote. Number 7, beguiled is associated with sex. Genesis 3:13. And the Lord God said unto the woman, what is it that thou hast done? And the woman said, the serpent beguiled me, and I did eat. What does the word beguiled mean? According to Strong, it means to lead astray, that is, mentally to delude. But it also adds, or morally to seduce. Number 8, why are they now ashamed of their nakedness? Genesis 3:7. And the eyes of both of them were opened, and they knew that they were naked. And they sewed fig leaves together, and made girdles for themselves. If Adam and Eve were only mentally deluded in some sort of intellectual manner, like pride, greed, or envy, and not morally seduced, then why did they make girdles, aprons, or skirts to cover their nakedness? Why didn't they instead cover their eyes, or ears, or hands, or mouth, if that was the root of their sin? It would seem more likely that sex had at least something to do with their sin. Number 9, why is this fruit or sex forbidden? I believe that God wanted to keep this couple and their children special and separate from the others for his holy purpose. Therefore, if the serpent could get Eve to mate with someone other than Adam, then that would destroy this pair's special progeny. I don't know who their children were supposed to mate with, but God imposed a similar command on the children of Israel. They were only supposed to marry within their community. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob all married close relatives. Those who didn't were cut off from Israel. God often isolates a special individual or group to spearhead his plans. Remember that God restarted Adam's line all over again with Noah, then narrowed it down to Abraham, and further narrowed it down through Jacob, Israel. Then God considered restarting all over again with Moses, but instead stuck with Israel until dismissing them later and focusing on those nations ministered to by Paul. The point is, at any given time, God has his favorites, and I think Adam and Eve and their descendants were supposed to be his original chosen people, separate from all these other trees. Number 10, mark of Cain. Genesis 4:15. And Jehovah said to him, if anyone kills Cain, he shall be avenged sevenfold. And Jehovah set a mark on Cain, so that anyone who found him should not kill him. If everyone on earth was a brother or a sister of Cain, I would think that God would not have to put a special mark on him so that his siblings knew who he was and not to kill him. But if there were many people wandering the earth who were not related to Cain, then it does make a lot more sense for Cain to have this mark of identification on him. 11. Where did Cain get his wife? Genesis 4:17. And Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Enoch. And he built a city, and he called the name of the city after the name of his son Enoch. Conventionally, Cain married one of his sisters. This is possible, but are we to think that a sister married Cain knowing that he killed her older brother? But if other women who were not Adam and Eve's children were living at the same time, I think it is more likely Cain married outside of the family. He wouldn't care. This reminds me a little of Esau. As I said, Abraham's children were supposed to marry within the family, but we are told Esau despised his heritage and married a Hethite woman. Later on, his mother Rebekah said her life would be worth nothing if Jacob also married a Hethite, because her heritage would have been ruined. I think Cain was similar, or actually worse. He despised his brother, and to murder him, he must have also despised his mother and father. No doubt he left his family for these other people. Because Cain is the elder son, also another thought here, because Cain is the elder son, the genealogy of Jesus should be traced through him to Adam. But it does not. It goes through Seth, the third born. Why? It's not because Cain was evil. There are lots of evil kings in Jesus' line. But they were all Israelites. Seth's wife must have been from within the family, while Cain's was not. There is even a theory that Cain himself was not the son of Adam. It teaches that Eve was beguiled, seduced, and impregnated by the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. In that case, no wonder Adam separated from Eve. I can also bring up the story of the royal family of Judah. Judah married a Canaanite woman and had 3 sons who would have contaminated the line of Jesus. But God killed the oldest 2 sons and replaced them with the twins Perez and Zerah, who were also sons of Judah, but through his legitimate and faithful daughter-in-law, Tamar. 12. Who lived in the cities built by Cain? Who is going to live in this city? Where are all these people coming from? If Cain named the city after his firstborn son, doesn't that seem to be putting the cart before the horse? Don't you have to have hundreds of descendants before you build a city for them? Wouldn't that take a very long time? Isn't it more likely these people came from outside his family? 13. Understanding the Hebrew word Adam. According to Strong, it is pronounced Adam. In Hebrew, its root word means ruddy. Strong defines it as a human being, an individual, or the species, mankind, etc. End quote. The point is that this word is a general, encompassing term. Along with this ruddy definition, others state more plainly that it means to be red. It is believed that this is so because the reddy color of human skin is caused by our bright red blood blushing through it. It may also be based on a word play between 2 very similar sounding words in the Hebrew language for our words man and earth. The Old Testament is very fond of doing this. It happens often. But unfortunately, we cannot see it when translated into English. In this case, in Hebrew, man is Adam, and earth is Adamah. And the man was made out of reddish earth. And perhaps if the man was made out of reddish earth, then the meaning is appropriate both ways. This brings to mind a saying which I might now appropriately render like this. Remember, Adam, that thou art Adamah, and unto Adamah thou shalt return. Number 14, King James translation or tradition makes us biased. But despite this general meaning in Genesis chapter 2, which is the story of the making of Adam and Eve, the King James uses the proper name Adam 6 times, and every time it is grammatically incorrect. The exact same generic word, Adam, is found a total of 16 times in this chapter. But arbitrarily, the King James chose to translate it man 10 times, but Adam 6 times. As surprising as this may sound to King James readers, most other Bibles I checked never use the proper name Adam in this chapter. 20 out of 24 of them that I checked only use the terms man and woman. Now, as I said, that doesn't mean I don't believe that these two people are the couple we know as Adam and Eve. But these words should not be used as proper names until chapter 3, when, and only then, does the man name his wife Eve. And it is also not until that chapter, or even chapter 4, that Adam should become a proper name for the man. If this is correctly understood, the use of the word Adam will not prejudice our understanding of its use in chapter 1. 15. Strong's Concordance muddies the waters. I often use Strong's Concordance to help clarify the meaning of words, especially when using the King James. This concordance uses a unique number for every unique Hebrew word. This helps the English reader to distinguish between words and clear up inconsistencies in that translation. Early in my study, I looked up the number for man, and I looked up the number for the proper name Adam, as found in the King James. I found that they had 2 different numbers, H120 and H121. This told me, according to the rules, that they must come from 2 different Hebrew words, and thus mean 2 different things. Perhaps one did mean a generic man, and the other did refer to a specific person named Adam. But, to make a long story short, it turned out that the 2 different numbers refer to the exact same Hebrew word. It seems that Strong just decided that if the King James wanted to translate the same word 2 different ways, they in this case would go along with it. That was unexpected and disappointing. Number 16, the number of times Adam is used. This makes the point plain. The Hebrew word Adam is used a total of 562 times in the Old Testament. The King James translates it into the proper name Adam 21 times. But as I've indicated, the King James also translates this exact same word as man or men or even persons the other 541 times. In other words, most of the time, everyone agrees it is a general term for all of humanity. 17. Adam as a personal name. Most of us are biased to think of Adam as a personal, proper name instead of mankind, humans, or men and women in general. But there are about 20 times when it can be used as a personal name. The question is, how do we tell the difference when it is the exact same word in the Hebrew? Well, 2 other factors come into play: context and the articles used in front of the word. Number 18, context. If the verse is specific and says something like this, as in Genesis 4:25 in the Concordant Literal Version, and knowing is Adam Eve, his wife again, and pregnant is she. Well, unless Eve was having sex with multiple Adams, then we can assume that the Adam in this context means a specific, identifiable, and individual man. It is then okay to use the proper name Adam instead of the generic word man. if you like, but you don't need to. 19. Adam with the definite article and without an article. In the Hebrew, every time we read the word Adam, it reads either the Adam or just plain Adam, without any article at all. Because of this, there is a second reason why we can surmise that Adam is a personal name in this verse about him impregnating Eve. That is because the Hebrew does not use the definite article in this verse. It does not say, and the Adam, impregnated Eve. It just says, and knowing is Adam, Eve. This allows for the personal name interpretation. This is the same in English. For instance, if a man's name is John, we just call him John. We do not use the definite article and call him the John. Because that gives an entirely different meaning. And it is not referring to one of our personal friends. So too in Hebrew, the Adam cannot be translated as referring to a particular person, but must be translated as the man, or the human, or the humanity, etc. In Genesis 2, in the story of Adam and Eve, the Hebrew word Adam is used 15 times. Of those, 13 times it is used with that definite article, which means that it cannot be translated as the personal name Adam. In this whole chapter of the creation of Adam and Eve, those two words, Adam and Eve, should never appear in it. It should only read the man and woman. So why the fuss? What difference does this make? In chapter 2 it doesn't. We all agree that the man in chapter 2 is Adam. But the important issue is that the Adam in chapter 1 cannot grammatically be called by that personal name Adam, because no one can prove he is this same man named Adam. Number 20. The Adams created on day 6 were generic. I apologize for all the grammar, but we can better understand chapter 1 as to what it says and what it doesn't say. Let's go back to the King James and read at Genesis 1:26. And God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion. 27. So God created man in his own image, male and female, he created them. The King James is not wrong, but it is not clear. Does man mean one man or mankind? In order to be clear, some versions use a more specific term, like humanity, so that we do not assume this verse is talking about an individual man, or especially one man named Adam. For instance, the concordant reads, make will we humanity in our image. The New International reads, let us make mankind in our image. The New Living reads, let us make human beings in our image. So again, the point is, in Genesis chapter 1, day 6, just because it says God created Adam, it doesn't necessarily mean this verse is talking about Eve's husband. It could mean God created a whole lot of humans, just like he created a whole lot of fish, birds, and land animals during the previous 2 days. 21. Does God create one pair or many pairs? On day 5, God made the fish, birds, and animals. And it indicates that God made many kinds to reproduce after themselves. But grammatically, we can't actually tell if God made one pair of each kind of fish, bird, and animal, or thousands. But God must have made thousands. So what's my point? Well, exactly the same type of grammar is used of the humans in the very next verse. The concordant reads at verse 26, and saying is the Elohim, make will we humanity in our image, and sway shall they over the fish of the sea. Male and female he creates them. Nowhere is there an indication that Elohim only created a single pair of humans. If we do not know anything about chapter 2, a first-time reader would make the assumption that God is following the same pattern as he did with all the other animals. There is no reason to think differently. If God made thousands of animals, why wouldn't he make thousands of humans? If God did something different and special, one would think that a verse would specifically say that. But there is no such verse. 22. How much time required for these events? If Adam and Eve were created on the same day, a lot of things had to happen very quickly. Did you ever try to put yourself in the mindset of Adam on the day he was created? Can you imagine being born today, but at the physical age of 21? Can you imagine your absolute bewilderment? All of a sudden you exist. And although you can think and even speak, you have absolutely no experience at anything. You know nothing. You don't know who you are, where you can go, what you can do, and what you can't. Not even what to eat or where to get it. How long do you think it would take you just to get a faint grasp on what is going on? How long would God have to talk to you to give you a vague idea of what to do next before you accidentally killed yourself? Animals are born with instinct, but not humans. Everything must be learned from scratch, and it takes years. Genesis tells us Adam named all the different kinds of animals, but how would he know what to name them unless he knew something about them? How long would it take for Adam to realize that there was no animal suitable for him and to genuinely become lonely? I would think that Adam was so overwhelmed with learning about God and the whole world around him that realizing his own sexual loneliness would actually take a long time. If Eve was created on the same day, only a few hours after Adam, then you have to explain how to fit all of this in, those few hours on day 6. And of course, when Eve awoke, completely bewildered as well, she would have to go through the same process. 23. More on the timing of events. Genesis 2:5 is actually the first verse of the account of Adam and Eve. It is giving us the setup. Remember while I read that plants were created on day 3, only 3 days before this. But Genesis 2:5 says, "And no shrub of the field is yet in the earth, and no herb of the field is yet sprouts. For Jehovah God hath not rained upon the earth, and a man there is not to serve the ground." To rectify this apparent contradiction, I believe these plants of the field are referring to cultivated shrubs, plants, or grains that are meant for food. And that is also why it is saying that there was no farmer to till the ground. It also says that it had not rained yet, but instead some sort of dew or ground spring was watering the land. What strikes me is that if this was only day 6 of creation, why is this notable? It seems to be important to tell us these things, but what is the big deal if it hasn't rained for just 3 days? Why is it necessary to tell us that the vegetation had to rely on these springs for their watering? But if this is happening at some point long after creation week, then it makes more sense. So now let me speculate why. Thousands of people may have been created on day 6, but they were nomadic. As the earth was good, so too I imagine life was good. But no one was a farmer. There was no civilization as we know it. Chapter 1 says the fish, birds, and animals roamed over the earth and filled it. Perhaps, too, it was so with the humans. Perhaps this is why Cain is mentioned as being the first one to build cities at a much later date. But now God decides to change things. He does two things. God makes farming possible with the creation of new plants and rain, but he also needs a farmer. So we read next at Genesis 2:7, "And Jehovah God formed the man of the dust of the ground, and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. And Jehovah God planted a garden eastward of Eden, and there he put the man whom he had formed." 24. Are animals created out of order? Genesis 2:19. "And out of the ground Jehovah God formed every animal of the field and every fowl of the air, and brought them to Adam to see what he would call them. And whatever Adam called each living creature, that was its name." This verse also seems to be out of order from chapter 1. But once again, the term animals of the field and fowls of the air makes one wonder if these are domesticated animals for personal use as opposed to the wild animals. Do we think that God brought every animal on the planet for Adam to name? Or is it more likely that he only named the birds and animals that he was going to be familiar with in and around the Garden of Eden? So, for now, that brings me to the end of this study. More could be said, but you get the picture, I hope. The question is, what does it matter? How does this benefit anyone? Well, if nothing else, bringing up apparent discrepancies and attempting to reconcile them is always a good thing to do in defense of our faith. I do not want to be ashamed of the gospel or any part of the Bible, including the early chapters of Genesis. If this might spark further study and further changes in our understanding and harmonization with everything else, then that is a good thing. Specifically, this might help in harmonizing the Bible with geology. Is it possible that these people of Genesis 1 were created thousands of years prior to Adam and Eve? Again, I'm not setting dates, but maybe it's a few years, maybe it's thousands. But if it was, might this explain where Neanderthal men fit into Earth's prehistoric history? Or even just civilizations that seem to be much older than 6,000 years? Might this explain the different races were all created at the same time in chapter 1? I am not necessarily agreeing with those ideas, but maybe there is an answer down one of those avenues. Regardless, I pray this message has blessed you in some manner. Amen.